Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're back with another NX live stream. We're still working on titles and things, but we'll have some more news on that later on. But this one is all about NX 13, which just was recently released. You've seen my face before, Brandon Roberts, and I have a couple of guests today to talk about NX 13. So you all can go ahead and introduce yourself. Jack, why don't you go
Sure.
first?
Yeah, I guess it's been a while since I've been on this stream.
Yep.
So I'm Jack. I'm in charge of a lot of the React stuff, although we do have a lot of devs now helping out with like the React Native integration, Next.JS. But I kind of oversee the whole thing. So that's me, and I was the one that did a lot of the Webpack 5 work for
Yeah.
NX13.
Okay, and I'm Victor. I'm a co-founder of Narwhal, and I'm an Next architect. I know someone who looks at Next more, from a bit further away to see what needs to happen. Most of my code contributions are in Next core, right? But I tend to know about pretty much everything that's going on.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say you look at NX with more of a critical eye, but
That's true, but that's true about everything I look at. I don't have to be, so, but yeah, I do look at it. I think overall, even with my critical eye, I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing.
oh, cool. Yeah, we'll definitely get into a lot of the things that have come up with NX 13. I see we got a nice group of people in the chat here. Uh, if you have questions, or thank you for coming through the chat. If you have questions, feel free to drop those in there, and we'll try to answer some of those along with the like I said, the topics that we have in mind. And a few things we'll talk about right up front. You can definitely join the NX community. We have the NX Narwhal community Slack that you can find there and join our community page that has information about all things around the NX community, including plugins and, like I said, the community Slack and other things there. So definitely check those links out. Yeah, so like I said, this one is we're talking about NX 13 that we just released last week, and we'll kind of go through some of the highlights there and maybe some other things along the way. Let's see, and I'll go ahead and bring up the blog post here, and I'll drop a link in the chat for those who haven't read the blog post yet, and then we can kind of jump into some of the items there. Yeah, main things we talked about in the blog post there were core performance improvements, Webpack 5, and React Native were a few things we highlighted in the title there. And I guess we can start off with, and I dropped a link in the chat for people to read up on that if you haven't already. But yeah, we can start with, I guess we could just start with some of the things in the order of how they are in the doc.
Mhm.
Because one of the
Mhm.
big things that we started off with were like the core performance improvements. So
Yep.
we can kind of dive into that and what that kind of means as
Mhm.
far as where we were and where we are now.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting discussion we can have about how important this core performance improvement. Essentially, when you use an Next, there are several things that contribute to your experience, right? What Next tries to do is to, in addition to providing all the developer experience stuff, integrating tools, but when it comes to performance, right, Next helps you be faster in two ways. The first way is it helps you not redo the things you normally do, like there's a computation twice by using computation cache, right? If I run a command and my coworker runs a command, if I computed something, they can benefit from the result of my computation, so it is faster, right? The second thing the Next does, you can use an X4, is to enable distribution. Is to say that, I have a very long thing to run that takes, let's say, 2 hours to run. Or I can run on multiple machines in a very transparent way, and we can talk about it, how it works maybe later. But essentially, it helps you to reduce the clock time without reducing the compute time. So essentially, the caching and affected, right? That one thing that helps you reduce compute time and the result clock time as well, right? By saying we're computing less. Distribution doesn't compute less. It just computes more on multiple machines, so the clock time is reduced. Right? So that's what Nx does. But to do that well, Nx has certain overheads. Right? Look, that works well when you have a fairly large graph to work with. If you have a project, like a graph of projects, and you have, let's say, 10 projects, and every project can be built to test it, that's cool. You can maintain it by hand, and that's what folks do when they use Yarn directly or some other tools, right? They add stuff to package the JSON and say, I have 10 projects, I wired it up, right? That's good. And that works, but for smaller graphs. So you don't have to be very smart to be able to do that. Like, the tool doesn't have to be very smart to be able to do that. You can be a smart, you have to be very smart to do it well, but the tool doesn't have to be, right? The tool is pretty dumb in this case. But the benefits are not as huge because your graph is very coarse-grained, right? So you actually cannot achieve a well utilization of things. You cannot cache small parts. You can only cache everything or nothing, things like that, right? So with Nx, you tend to have a larger graph, right? Let's say hundreds of nodes, because Nx manages the graph for you, right? And that's the important feature. And that if you have a graph of, let's say, like 1,000 nodes, right? And many of our clients have graphs like that, right? No way you can by hand, maintain all of this stuff. 1,000 nodes is a lot of nodes, right? So what Nx does, it does it for you, right? You just write your code, you partition it, you import things, and Nx figures out what your graph is like. So when you want to cache, it can cache smaller parts of your graph. When you want to distribute, it can distribute more efficiently because there are smaller units to distribute. So you can achieve higher degree of agent utilization, right? That smartness is an important property, right? It's not just a nice to have. It actually allows you to do a lot of cool things, right? With your graph without paying that cost. Anyone who try things like Bazel, built by Google, which I like, Bazel is a fantastic tool, but the cost of managing Bazel is very high, right? And most teams cannot afford it, right? They try and like, okay, the overhead is too much, right? And Nx aims to reduce this overhead to magically figure it out for you. But this magically figuring out is the computation in itself. And it has to know what's going on in your workspace. When you run the command, it has to see what has happened, what things depend on what the graph is like, what files are where, all of those things, right? What is the computation hash every bit, what we know, what we don't know, things like that, right? That smartness is cool, it's very useful, but there is an overhead. So that's what we call core performance in Nx in this particular case, is that we made that process of analyzing your workspace incrementally, right? And from scratch, a lot faster, right? So we had, obviously, we knew about this issue from day one, right? We knew that if you have a large enough workspace, you cannot reanalyze everything from scratch. That doesn't work. So Nx analysis was always incremental, or has been since pretty much day one, right? Where we have a cache of what we think your workspace is like, stored on disk. So when you run a command, we look at the current state of certain things with your cache, we see what's different, and we recompute that delta by essentially updating that graph, right, to be up to date, and then we run a command, right? That works for fairly large workspaces fairly well, but if you have a legit large workspace with say 100,000 files, right? Or like massive apps, right? Like some enterprises have. It's not that unusual, right? That overhead is noticeable, right? You see it, it's annoying, right? It actually makes developer experience worse, right? Noticeably worse. It's noticeable when you run it locally because you see that small gap with the computation app. It's noticeable when you run it in CI because CI has to recompute the whole thing from scratch because it doesn't have the previous version of it, right? So what we try to do in 13 and X13 is to reduce all possible places where this overhead occurs to make it a lot faster, right? And we did it in two ways, right? We optimize the recomputation from scratch, saying if you have a new workspace, you have never seen it, like you're an agent in CI, for example, locally, it's almost never the case. Most of the time you have the workspace you have, right? But your CI agent kicks in, right? It now can figure out what your workspace is all about, right? Basically, create a project graph in what that's how we call it, right? A lot faster in our measurements, like an order of magnitude faster for larger workspace. We're talking about like 5 times, 8 times faster, so a lot faster, right? That's one area. That mostly affects your CI, doesn't affect your local development as much because locally, again, that doesn't happen very often, right? But CI happens all the time, right? The second area is incremental recompute. We're saying, well, I just ran my build command, and then I went home, came back, and this is pre-pandemic because I went downstairs, came back upstairs, right?
You went to get some lunch, and then you came back and you built.
Yeah, exactly. And I run it again, right? And so Nx knows what happened before. It knows what files are changed, so it can actually do that fairly fast, right? So that's the second use case. And we address the second use case by introducing James Henry, who is a former Norwellian, but he still contributes to and works with us and contributes to Next. He helped to build this a process called a daemon process that runs in the background, and it can pre-compute this stuff for you, right? Because certain things we just cannot make faster. Like it takes, let's say, 500 milliseconds to compute something, right? Or 1 second to compute something, right? And a second matters for the developer experience. You don't want to see a small gap, right? I mean, you can argue how much it matters. It does matter. Right? And for very large workspaces, it could be awful if you have a slow computer. Not everyone has like an M1 Max, whatever.
Fresh,
like
and everybody has a fresh off the truck.
Yeah,
M1
exactly.
Pro coming to mitigate some of these things.
Yeah, exactly. So it can be noticeable, right? So now we can figure it out and pre-compute it such that when you actually run your command, that thing is very, very fast, right? And again, it depends on the size of the workspace and how fast your computer is. But for very large projects, we are seeing like an order of magnitude difference, right? Where the cost, the overhead went from being very noticeable to being at this point, the overhead is basically just transferring data over the socket is the whole overhead, right? So it's approaching zero, right? And we're going to work more on it to make it even smaller. But even at this point, you have to have like even if you have a very large workspace, but again, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of files kind of workspace, right? A massive workspace, right? You should rarely see anything associated with the overhead of using an X, right? Of us figuring out what your workspace is like, right? So the big improvement for some of our clients in particular have giant workspaces, right? And in general, I think that's the difference between us and some other folks in that we have real companies who we work with giant projects. So we actually can beta test stuff and see like, is it actually working, right? Are the benefits real or they're like imaginary, right? And the benefits we are seeing are real, not imaginary. Like it's getting faster everywhere.
Yeah, Jack, I'm pretty sure you can speak to some of that because we know you works on some larger projects and talk about how that kind of impacts developer experience and that sort of thing.
Yeah, like Victor said, NX is used by our clients, and a lot of them have like huge workspaces, right? So a lot of our feature improvements aren't just things that we dream up. We're like, oh, what'll be fun? We can do this. It's like, no, something actually became painful for our clients, like running a command in NX or loading the depth graph or something. We even got one client who asked about like, can I run the depth graph for them because it takes so long for them because their machine's not as powerful. So run it, take a screenshot, send it over. And every time we hear this, we kind of feel bad because like we shouldn't really be introducing new problems for clients. We should be solving problems. So a lot of these speed ups are definitely helping people. And like these companies have teams that are like, I don't know, anywhere from like several tens of developers to like hundreds, maybe more. So it definitely has a high impact. And one client in particular we're trying to upgrade right now to, actually to NX.12, but then eventually to 13. And a lot of these things, which we'll talk about later too, like the per project config and stuff, are things that they've been waiting for like over a year. And we can finally be like, these are done, you can upgrade, and everyone's going to be happy.
Yeah, definitely. I know that project, and like I said, prior projects that I worked on also, I know that was when let's say we'll get into the standalone project config there, but just one of those things that you like other developers as you work with it, you kind of, it's just one of those things you have to deal with while it's there. But then once it's like I said, we take some of those take some of those things and those things that other developers deal with, and we had to deal with it also, and kind of fold those back in to help speed up in many different ways too. So yeah. But yeah, the like Victor mentioned, the NX daemon is out there. It's opt-in. If you take a look at the blog post, opt-in for now. But we definitely want to encourage everyone who's upgrading to NX13 to opt into that flag. It's just an environment variable, so you can set that. And if you run into any issues, feel free to open some issues on the GitHub repo, or even in the community Slack. Yeah, you can definitely reach out to people there because we have Narwhal folks in there that monitor those channels. And in addition to like the community is in there in there also. Throw a quick plug out to the community with Jay Bell and crew. He tweeted over the weekend that they're almost at 3,000 members. So definitely want to, if you haven't joined the community Slack already, definitely go ahead and do that. Let's see. Well, we kind of talked about this a little bit a minute ago, but the new consolidated workspaces and project configuration, and Jack
Right.
kind of mentioned it where we are with that now, and I guess either one of you, or we can just talk about like what that means, what the issues that we were having before, and kind of why we introduced this new structure of how to break up your large JSON file, configuration JSON files. We'll start with that.
Yeah.
I can start. So like on a normal like smaller workspaces, you won't really have these issues, although there are still some issues even there. But like on anything that's large, and large maybe like 100, 200 projects or more in the workspace, like you open the JSON file, and all of a sudden, like first of all, it's hard to navigate, right? Like you're searching and then it's lagging because you have all these other plugins and stuff that operates on JSON files. And we even get complaints like, I opened the JSON file and none of my plugins work because VS Code would disable it because it's too large.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's not really good. Like we always want to make the DX good for developers. So the fact that they can't edit their files is bad. So like this per project thing has been been asked by a lot of developers for like over a year. And the other thing is like, you want one place to check your project configuration. You don't want like, Angular JSON or Workspace JSON plus Nx.JS, and you're looking at two different locations just to find the same settings for projects. So this consolidation, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to add that in general, some things are taking longer to land than you think they should, like they could have, right? And partially it's because we are like, I don't want to say like we are so great at everything, but we try not to break people, and we have some constraints to make sure things are done in a way where most of the time, right, most folks aren't affected, at least in a substantial way. There is no major breakage, right? In general, breaking changes is a thing. I don't think it's a normal thing to have. Right? Breaking changes is basically like most of the time it's a failure of engineering, right? Whether you use Semver or not, the whole Semver thing is a separate point. Like you shouldn't be breaking people, right? If you have a large project, as Jack mentioned, with hundreds of people working on it at some company, right? It doesn't matter to them if they're going one major version up or one like they don't feel bad. Oh, we have to spend a month fixing it, but it's a major version, so I guess it's okay, right? No, it's still not okay, right? So we want to minimize those type of effects on folks, right? And for project configs in particular, there are two ways in which we used to run things, right? We used to run things using the Next CLI and everything for everything but Angular, right? You can have there's an Next CLI that runs its own config and does. And then for Angular, we would sort of use Angular CLI in a particular, basically have a plug in Angular CLI and replace one part of our Next story in there, because Angular folks like Angular CLI. Angular CLI is good, right? And we want to replace, remove Angular CLI from the day-to-day use because it's too much of an ask. So we'd swap out one part of the offering, right? And that makes certain things hard to do because Angular CLI doesn't expect multiple configs, right? It's just, it's like we were constrained by that, right? So that took a long time because we had to remove Angular CLI. Now we run Angular dev kit for Angular folks, but no longer Angular CLI, and we basically replicate the Angular CLI experience for Angular people instead, such that we can do that thing that not just for everyone but Angular folks, which we could have done a year ago very easily, right? But do it for Angular folks without breaking any of the Angular apps or Angular tools they use, right? So the builders built by the Angular team or by the Angular CLI team will still work, even though they don't expect multiple configs, because through the magic of our, this setup, right? We make it work, right? We provide an adapter layer that kind of teaches the configuration to get, like all of those things you don't see as a user. You're like, well, why don't you split just the configuration files in two places? That seems, it should be easy to do, right? But it is hard to do because there are existing things with existing projects, right? There are large projects that folks already use, and it's very hard to tell them, by the way, now you have to swap the CLI and do something else because, no, we have, and the same applies to other folks, right? We have different communities we try to work with, integrate with well. we cannot just bulldozer through the opinions, right? We have to do something that the community will respect, right? So that's why it took a bit longer, but the result is good. And we also added support like a generator that splits your configuration for you, so you can just say do it, and it just works, and nothing is broken. With an asterisk, something can be broken if you actually read that file in your own script or whatever, right? But really, really nothing is broken. And even in VS Code, if you all the configuration, you can click on a thing over there, write in the configuration, and it'll be moved to a separate file, right? So we made the experience hopefully as painless as it can be for folks. And yes, now they can open the configuration files. The rebasing works reasonably well. Like lots of things that just got fixed by that. But it required a lot of work to prep for this, right? The actual work here was substantial, but it's the prep that was like the most challenging thing, to make sure that no one is broken, including Angular folks, right? Who just have a different setup for Next. We have a special way of doing things for Angular folks compared to everyone else.
Yeah, and also like for people who are upgrading, they might have their own custom generators and whatever, their own scripts that assume certain things. So like for those people, they will have to import our new utilities and dev kit. And then for NX console, which shout out to John who maintains it, like he has to maintain support basically all the way back to NX8. And so we can't just assume like everyone's going to be on per project config. We do have like certain adapters and stuff to make sure things work.
Yeah, definitely. So, like I said, I think that's that's one of the big things that I know that we focus on is being able to move people from one configuration to another, or update that, or even versions of external libraries without breaking changes. Even though we consider according to Simver that those would be breaking changes. Just using like Angular for example, moving from 12 to 13 when it comes out, that'll be for NX, it'll be a feature, but because we provide the migrations and things along the way and trying to maintain that stability there. So we definitely have those things in mind, even when we're, like say, introducing these features, and may take a little more time to make sure that we can move people along that way with little to no impact to them. Now, see, we got John in the chat. He said he was here for the shout out.
Nice.
Thanks to all the work you've done on NX console, speeding that up and making it a lot more user friendly. So definitely shout out to John and the other people who have contributed to NX console also. We have a person in the chat who also enjoyed the per project configuration. They said they don't have to worry about that as much anymore. So
Yeah.
definitely enjoyed that. And like I said, the thing that I ran into before was, like I said, working on large projects was you have to do that, like the whole thing with Husky, and every time somebody commits, you have to like reshuffle all the resort all the projects and things to avoid the merge conflicts and all that. So this definitely takes away that issue there.
No, we're in agreement. That should have been there from day one. The issue is not like we didn't know it's a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time when you see something like, okay, that looks weird, it's weird because there is some constraint that prevents us from making it not weird. And it takes longer to untie us from that constraint and make it not weird. So it's like we knew it sucks, okay? So it's not like oh, it's pretty good. 20,000 line JSON file, what's the problem here, right? So I'm happy as well that it's finally there, and in general the configuration file is it makes more sense right now where things live, where they're located. And again, you should just upgrade from version to version, and really you shouldn't see anything in terms of negative impact. Just lots of places, everything should still run the way it runs right now, right? With an asterisk, unless you're manually reading that file with some script and doing something to it, right? But that aside, so I hope that it's just good stuff for folks, and no headaches.
Yeah, definitely. Just gotta give shout outs in the chat there. We could keep continue down a little bit further, talking about the like configuration and things that we done there. And another thing that we've kind of transitioned as far as moving from different versions of NX is kind of how we handle dependencies between targets. And before, we used to have like the with depths flag where you had to kind of manually say that you want to, if you have multiple projects in your workspace that are built and like depend on each other, you have to use this like with
Right.
flag to make sure that make sure that we have enough context to build those in the right order. And
Yep.
now we've introduced the target dependencies where you can define that more at a global level,
Yep.
or at a more granular level through config to handle that for you.
Right. Yeah. It's again another thing that we basically the idea that if you say you have multiple build targets and you have two libraries, a parent and a child, and you can say, oh, to build a parent, I need to build a child first, right? So now, prior, what you would have to do is to say Nx build parent, and you would say with depths, meaning that the parent depends on the child, and with depths would be used at the command level to tell Nx, well, you know the graph, right? Look at the depths, build the depths first, and then build the parent. And you can remove with depths in this case, and then you can just build a parent without the child. And that would be sort of the idea. And it can apply to lots of different things. In this case, we're talking about build, but it can also mean dependence between targets within the same project. They can say test requires build. Before I run my test, I need to build. So in this case, when you run next test parent, it will build parent first if it hasn't been built already. So that's sort of the idea now. So you can establish those invariants between targets, either per project or globally. So you can say for every build, certain properties hold, I need to build my dependencies first. Or you can do it per project. And for this particular project, it's built with certain things, right? The reason why we had it done the way it was done before, again, that was part of just bad design on our part, where it could have been, we could have moved toward this model a bit quicker. But in reality, it's a bit trickier because now we assume that you cannot skip dependent targets, right? If your parent depends on child and you're building a parent, you have to build a child. You cannot skip it, right? So you can say, oh, that's weird. And before that could have been a problem, right? It only stopped being a problem when we optimized our caching, right? So now if you're building a parent and you need to build a child, you need to have the child. Parent cannot be built without a child, so clearly child has to be there, right? So if you always rebuild the child, even if it's restoring from cache, like removing folder in disk, copying over, right? That operation, although pretty fast, it actually is something. Right? If you have a target, like a graph of 1,000 projects, and you're rebuilding the app, you can have 1,000 things being rebuilt. That can be, you can see it. You can super well see it on Windows. Okay, Windows I/O is like shockingly slow, right? So you can it's actually a huge problem, right? So we had to have with depths before to say that, okay, we know you have to rebuild it, and we even know that it's probably cached, right? But just the act of restoring from cache is slow. Okay. So if you have 1,000 things to restore, right, on Windows, you just cannot copy files faster than this. That's just a limitation of the I/O, right? And not everyone has, again, latest Mac with super fast SSDs and blah, 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 right? So you can actually have a slow machine, right? It can be noticeable, right? So that was the reason there that we always wanted to rerun everything. That is the right thing to do because that's an invariant you want to say. If parent requires child to be built first, well, you have to build it. You cannot skip it, right? That's madness. But it was slow, so we assumed the developer would know. The first time they would build it, they would build it. The second time they could build this. It's up to the developer. Once we optimized our cache to be such that we don't restore for no reason. Now, if we know what's in disk, and we always know now what's in disk, right? We can say, oh, actually, nothing needs to happen in terms of restoration. We know the right files are already in the right place. We don't need to remove it and copy it over. None of that, right? We actually know that you already have the child built correctly and all the files are located correctly. So we do nothing, right? Because we reduce this cost to practically zero. It's not exactly zero, but close to zero, right? Now we can actually do 1,000 things, right? Because if something needs to be rebuilt, well, it should be rebuilt anyway. But if it doesn't need to be rebuilt, then it's zero, right? The copying files from the cache is not zero. So that's what we couldn't do before. Now, once we achieve that, right, we could allow 1,000 things to be restored, quote unquote, right, instantly. If it's already in the right places, we could say, let's just always do it. Why would you ever skip it, right? There is no reason to skip it, right? And that's the thing that has happened. Again, so there was a reason in that. So we had to optimize a mechanism somewhere deep down, right? So if you see a tool that does cache computation and it doesn't do that, it always removes files and copies it back, right? You're in trouble. You're in trouble for many reasons, okay? For file watches are going to be lots of things are going to be crazy, but it's also slow on Windows because the person who is likely to benchmark in that tool is benchmarking on a very fast MacBook or Linux laptop where I/O is fast, right? Once they hit an old Windows laptop, they'll be like, oh my God, it takes 10 seconds, right? You can actually see it, right? So once you optimize that interaction, right, you make the copying optional. You only copy when you have to, right? When something has changed, right? Then, like let's say you download from the internet, from the cloud, right? And you have a newer version, then you copy, right? Otherwise, you don't copy. So the file's already there. Why would you copy, right? Then you can do it always, and you can with depth is still there. We didn't remove the flags because as I mentioned, we don't break people, right? Unless usually what breaks people is not an X being broken, but the things we depend on, like in dependencies, the other tools we rely on, like Jest, Storybook, things like that, right? And because we don't break, the flag will be there and probably will always be there, right? Because
it does say it's deprecated though, so maybe try not to use it.
Yeah, like I think, but I think that the thing that if you have target dependency configured correctly, it should be a no-op. It's always with depth. It cannot be not with depth. So that's sort of the property that with depth is always the right thing to do. You never want to not recompute something you depend on if it has to be recomputed. It's just before, just the act of doing it, even if nothing changed, was a small cost, but it would add up. Now there is no cost, so it doesn't add up. So we always do it, right? So it's a good thing that it happened, and it allows you to express like lots of interesting workflows, like incremental builds, lot of other things. Because once you make something free, right, you can assume it. You can use it a lot more freely, right? You can say, I'm going to rebuild 1,000 things. If I already have everything, it's free, not a problem, right? So we made it essentially free, right? You're running something it's truly free, right? Not just copying files from like truly free, right? And because of that, we can always do it, right? But yeah, target depth is a big deal. We replaced a bunch of special cases we had in our code base, just remove them and replace them with a more general purpose, a much better fit mechanism for everyone, really. And we should have done this before. It's just that optimization we did took longer than it's hard to do well, surprisingly, right? So once we nailed that, right, we basically got rid of all this legacy stuff we had.
Yeah, I like the part that stands out to me also about target dependencies is that it gives you like a easy structured way to set up, like I said, maybe not not targets that depend on each other, but also things within the same target that you need to do. Like if you need to, like let's take Angular packages, for example. Like if you have schematics with an Angular package, then you need to build the package first, and then that produces some artifacts. And then you have some schematics or migrations that you want to bundle with that, or generators. Then you need to build those also as a separate kind of target there. But you can have those two things kind of combined together to produce that final build for that particular package, or to ship that those things all together. And it's easier to do that now because you can define those things separately and then define how you want those things, in what order you want those things to run. So you can say build all my dependencies first, then like copy these files over that I may need for distributing that library. So it gives you some more structure there, which I like.
Yeah, the NX repo itself has some good examples of its usage. So if you want to check that out.
Yeah, good point there. Always when people ask for tools, or not ask for tips or things on how to set things up, I usually point them to the NX repo, because we're usually building those same type of libraries, or have some examples of that in the repository itself that people can reference, or even where there's the repository itself or the test inside the repo to figure out how those things work. In the case that we are still putting together documentation for that and things like that. So, but yeah, and like we talked about having external tools, or having to like collaborate and support external tools that we depend on, and that other users of Nx depend on for their needs. I think Webpack kind of falls right into that category of things that we support and things that we maintain, along with the other dependencies in our repo. And we introduced. I guess we can talk next about Webpack, and Jack, if you want to talk about kind of where we were and like where we are now as far as Webpack support, because I know it's been a big thing.
Yeah, so I mean, Webpack 5 support, I should say, is in itself is not like a big task. The problem is that like different workspaces may use different customizations. There might be different setup. So like certain features that were supported by our Webpack 4, even if we upgrade all the plugins stuff, it may not carry over just due to like, some of the differences between the different Webpack plugins, or some are just not supported anymore. So some of the things that we had to do were like rewriting some of the logic of the plugins that we maintain ourselves, and then also doing some cleanup. Like there's certain things that Webpack 4 did that Webpack 5 didn't need to do. And lastly, it's also about build speed. So like you can say Webpack 5 works in theory, right? So technically it works, it builds fine. But then if it's 2-3 times slower, which we've seen in other projects, like people are not going to be happy, right? Because like my production app used to take, I don't know, say 3-5 minutes to build. Now it takes like 20 minutes. It's not going to be good. So a lot of that upgrade is also keeping that in mind and seeing the differences in Webpack speed, and looking at like what are some of the options that we can use to speed that up, right? And then we kind of did it slowly too. Like in Nx.12, there were some people who opted into the experimental Webpack 5 feature. So we didn't just want to like put it in and then all of a sudden people have to upgrade and there's no warning. So there were several community members who did open GitHub issues and took a look, fix up some things. So I think so far it seems to be pretty good, but if you run into issues, obviously open something up on GitHub and we'll take a look. Kind of related to that too is like a small refresh of some of our rollup config as well. So rollup is used not for apps, but for our libs. And there were several things that were kind of outdated, like some plugins weren't really needed. Some things were slowing down, and some things were generating like npm audit warnings, even though like whatever you feel about those audit warnings, people do report them, right? And then some organizations also will have like security team that's in charge of this. So like you cannot have a tool that continuously spits out warnings, and then we just say like, it's not a big deal. It's not used for a production app anyway. It's just a build tool. Like that doesn't fly. So a lot of cleanup there. If you do see any warnings with Webpack 5, roll up anything, open up issue, we try to keep things like no warnings, right? No one wants to see those. No one wants to see like their terminal with like a million warnings all the time. So
yeah, we don't want to get to definitely don't want to get to the place where, like you said, all the warnings just become noise and then you just ignore them. Because I saw on Twitter over this past weekend there was a pretty popular package that got compromised, and it seemed to be traveling. It's been making its rounds, of course, because it was one of those things that it could have been one of those things that it got compromised and it could have ended up landing in the the warnings, and people are like, oh, whatever, you can go ahead and bump to the latest version, and then you got some malicious software on your machine. So not like I said, take care of those warnings, and not having them just be something you ignore, I think is definitely valuable.
Yep. And then I guess to Victor's point about like not breaking workspaces, like if you upgrade and migrate, if you didn't customize Webpack, you should be fine. If you do have like certain loaders that you're using, make sure you just update to the latest version. Like most of the popular ones, if you just update them, there should be no problems.
Yeah, definitely so. Because like I said, if you're using a pretty, well, I don't know if that's a thing to say, a pretty standard Webpack setup, and then there'll be maybe cliche to say, but if you're not doing anything too off the wall, then maybe you can go ahead and upgrade without issue. But yeah, we also have a migration guide for that, for the upgrade. See if you need to do anything to make that process smoother.
Yeah, if you're not sure and you're on 12, you can always try the Webpack 5 feature by using a generator first, without committing fully to Nx.13. Because like if you run it doesn't work, then at least you can upgrade a few things before you go to 13.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and shout out that feature also, because I think it's an underrated feature that, well, users of Nx, I think, appreciate this one, but the being able to generate migrations is definitely being able to pick and choose which things, if you want to, like I said, along with the generators, being able to pick and choose even through upgrades, which things you want to change. Like if you don't want to opt in on Webpack 5, you have the option to do that through the migrations and things there. So yeah.
And then I guess the last thing about Webpack 5 is like coordinating all the storybook support as well. So we had like two other developers, so Yuri and Katerina, they're working on the Webpack support. Originally, it was supposed to land in 12, and then we ended up just releasing everything in 13 because it kind of goes together. And they had all these migrations and different things, and it just came together. We completely removed the Webpack 4 support, so the code is a lot cleaner. There's no like checking which version you're on. So shout out to them for completing that work as well.
Yeah, definitely. So a lot of work going on around, like you said, Webpack 5 and Storybook, and making sure those things are working well together. So yeah, definitely good. Kudos to them there. Next up, one of the things, this is one of the things that Webpack enables, was one of the big things that Webpack 5 enabled was introducing module federation. I know that it's been a big thing in the Angular space that we've been working on, and that we definitely want, or that our clients have been using, and that we definitely want to make that, setting that up and having that be as seamless as possible. Be at the, let's say, feel free to jump in, but like I said, Column and Leo, who are other Narwhalians on the team, definitely did some work there, and trying to get that put together.
Yeah, I think they did a good job, and we definitely need to like just create more content showing it off, because I think the supported stuff is actually pretty cool. And I just want to make one point in general about module federation. Not even our support. Our support, I think, is cool. Good job. But I think module federation or microfront is a loaded term, but those type of things, like independently buildable chunks of apps and mono repos, is just like, it's just friendship. It's like everything works well, because once you have that, it's much easier to manage the cost associated with micro frontend if you have everything in the same place, right? Much easier to coordinate deployments and a lot of other things. So always wanted to add something like that to NX, even though I have my reservations about dependent deployability as a desire for many enterprises, right? But the idea that you can build different slices of the app independently, right? That's a good idea for many reasons. One of them, it allows you to speed up your build, right? If you slice your app into 10 things, even if you deploy all those together, right, you can actually build those 10 things on separate machines. First of all, caching works because each of those can be independently cached. Already good, right? So you almost never rebuild all 10 things. But even if you do, you can build them on separate machines. And that allows you to do it transparently, right? Such that your clock time is actually very low, right? So it's as if you're building only one of them, right? And so for many things like just build optimization performance, right? I think it actually works really well. And now we have a good support for it, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. So like I said, Manfred Stayer built in like the initial support for Angular projects, and we've built on top of that and included the generators there, and made that process simpler and more straightforward. So if you're looking at speeding up large projects, along with some of the other things that we've done, module federation is definitely an option there. Even if you want to ship everything as an individual unit, as opposed to trying to go down the whole independent deploy thing, which I think there, like I said, people have opinions on both sides of which is more.
We won't get into that. I think Victor is holding back right now.
We can talk about it. It's fine. I get it. Everyone wants it. It's one of the things where the pros are easily seen, and the cons you always see like a year from then. It's like, oh yeah, it's actually a lot harder than I thought. It's like, okay, but okay, cool. So that is it's a very attractive thing that has a dark side, that you don't see right away.
Okay, I think that's a good place to move on from that one, because we want people to have enough information to make the right decision. Definitely on that. We did have one quick question that I'll bring up here, and is, can you use project JSON with existing repositories with large workspace JSON or Angular JSON files? And is there going to be a migration or a generator schematic to do this? And the answer to that is yes. We actually, if you look at the blog post, the blog post should be posted in the channel there for NX13, and we actually provide a migration that will help you convert your large, like monolithic workspace JSON or Angular JSON to break it up to a project per project JSON configuration, and you can run that, and if everything looks good there, you can just check that in and keep it rolling there. So definitely that is available there. And of course, if you run that and you run into some like issues after migrating to the new standalone format, which like in addition to that will be the new default in Nx.13. So where you get that project JSON, and everything should fall back to the previous way if you have an existing setup there. So you can do it both ways. If you have some projects that are using that configuration, and then you have some that are still kind of living within your Angular JSON as you go, it'll down level that everything together to make that simpler. So excuse me. Let's see. One thing next we can talk about everybody's favorite subject, which is documentation. Not always, but I will highlight that we did refresh the NX doc site, because I think there's a lot of cool work that went into that, and I'll kind of bring up the preview of the site here. Just on the homepage, just a few things I'll highlight here is that we've kind of updated over time, and the top part here is really, I think, is a lot of interesting work went into this one with Ben, that added the nice animations and things on the background there on the top of the homepage, and just the flow of how we talk about what NX is and the things that it provides on the website there, and like the stacks we support, and support for monorepos. Of course, we talked about some of those features there, about only rebuilding those things, and kind of the benefits that you get with using NX in our monorepo there. But one of the big things that we started, I guess, along that leading up to NX13 was rebuilding the Docs app in Next.js or Next.js and React. So that was a pretty big undertaking there, to move from one stack to another and deploying it and everything, and having there be no noticeable difference, at least initially, before we started like cleaning things up more. So definitely want to shout out Ben, and even Jack. You had some work on redoing the site also, to move on top of that, move on to Next.js and deploying with Vercel and all that.
Yeah, Ben's done a fantastic job with all the improvements in the last little while. One thing I will mention is, like, if you do see anything in the docs you want to improve, you can always open a PR on GitHub, and you can see the Vercel preview like right away, so you don't have to like wait till it's deployed to see it.
Yeah, definitely. So that's definitely a good thing to highlight there, which is one thing that I always appreciate when we have documentation that's kind of folded in with the project itself, that you get those previews built in, so you can not just look at the markdown files, but actually see how it like lays out on the page and everything. So
it's actually a good plug for Nx. I just one point about the docs. I think Ben showed me. So we are reworking the homepage, which already got better, right? But to make it even better, and I think it's what we have is cool. Yeah, it's fairly scriptive and stuff, and looks okay as well. But Ben is working on a much improved version of it, which should land fairly soon. So I'm so excited to tweet about it. It's like this container. So once it's out, I'll be happy to.
No spoilers, Victor. No spoilers. You got to.
Yeah, but something. Well, I want to say that something really cool is coming. That's going to hopefully be liked by categorically liked by everyone. Right? I don't want to see a single dislike of the new design. Right? so. What I was going to plug into that, what you mentioned, that the doc side we have is in the same repo with the packages for the Next stuff. So Next stuff was built with an X, right? It works really well. But the cool part about using a tool like an X for like your open source project, it doesn't have to be as big. An X is a fairly large tool with lots of packages, different plugins for different tools. But even if you have a smaller tool, right? You have a small, like 2 packages you publish, even a single package you publish, right? Chances are what you have with your package you publish in npm, you have things like, maybe an example app used to surf and see if it works, right? Or like an example project, a suite of end-to-end tests, that is separate, a doc site, which is separate, right? So all of the things are like auxiliary things for your package that is very convenient to manage in the same monorepo, right? Like you can put them side by side on different, you can organize it very nicely such that you can make changes to the docs and the code at the same time. Look at this, it's just better for you as a maintainer. It's better for contributors who don't have to look at 10 different repos to figure out how to orchestrate this change. They clone one repo, they make a change with one CI process, right? It's pretty straightforward. So I encourage folks who have open source projects and perhaps didn't think that a monorepo is a monorepo is overkill because I don't build a giant app or whatever. No, a tiny package with a few auxiliary things actually are easier to manage when it's all together. All right, so check it out. And Next.repo is a good example of that. I mean, we do a lot of stuff in Next.repo because it's a bigger repo. Like the depth graph app is a separate app. We build and copy in a different package. Like we do most of it you would likely to do in your place. Your package will most likely be smaller. But a lot of the advantages of using the monorepo setup, Nx in particular, they're sort of the same, whether you have a small project or a large project, right? So use Nx for open source, basically, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, most
go ahead, Jack.
I was gonna say most legit open source project probably at least have examples folder. Even if your docs, you don't have a separate docs website, you probably have some examples. And those are great use cases for Nx. Like you have your package and then you have examples.
Yeah, definitely agree. Whenever, I don't know if anyone else does this, but whenever I go to a repo or something that's not using Nx, and it has that pretty standard monorepo setup, I just try to go and add it to that repo and see what happens and see see if it'll build everything and still keep working. So I'll throw that out there for the community. If you see some open source projects that aren't using Nx, but using that pretty standard packages setup, monorepo setup, go into that repo, and I'll put the command here in the chat that you can run on that repo, and run it on that repo, run the builds twice, and tell us, reach out to us on Twitter and the community Slack and let us know. But there's the command there. You go to the open source project, choose npx add Nx to monorepo, and see if you can run the builds and everything, and let us know how that goes, because we're always interested. We want Nx, like I said, Nx shines in those kind of repos, open source projects, and we definitely want to see have it more battle tested against other setups also. So definitely check that out. Let's see. One thing we talked about are kind of adding Nx to existing monorepos. Another thing that people normally do when they set up Nx is talking about their CI setup, and we did want to highlight that we added some new guides in the docs that specifically talk about how you integrate Nx into your CI environment. Like I mentioned before, if you go and add Nx to a repo, open source project, you definitely get some benefits locally there, but you can also extend that to your CI environment. You can also extend that to your CI environment and speed up your kind of workflows there. So definitely check out some of the guides that we have there in the docs. Because I know that's something that, like I said, a lot of people, when they're starting, they want to see what kind of the value things that are of value that they can get out of adding Nx, and that's definitely one way. Let's see. Coming to see James, we got a bunch of people in. James, he said, "What are you all excited for in the Nx 13 post?" I guess he's talking to the chat there. But yes, we do have some people that are excited that haven't upgraded. Evan in the chat says, "Congrats on the release. Bumped this side project today without issues." And that's always good to know that people are able to upgrade there. Another thing that got a refresh here in the refresh here with Nx.13 was the dependency graph, and definitely had a lot of cool work that went into this one, especially from Ben and Philip. Definitely collaborated and worked on this one to make sure that the dependency graph is still getting a lot of love, because that's definitely one of the easiest ways you can see where all your like dependencies and things are in your NX workspace. So I'll bring up bring up some the newly polished dependency graph. Excuse me. And you can see, I'll share that link in the chat here. If you want to see a live preview of the NX Examples app, just to see what that looks like.
And Brendan also talked about we should maybe share the Nx.dev graph itself, like live on Nx.dev. So I think we'll probably do that at some point. It's just there's so many different things that we have to work on. It might be a little bit lower down the priority list. And I think James Henry he reiterated his question about post version 13. He asked, "What are the three of us excited about?"
Oh, okay. Oh yeah, for me, I think it's the dependency graph. Of course, I like all the speed improvements and all that, but the dependency graph getting a new coat of paint, as they say, was definitely one of the things I was excited about when I saw it, because I think it kind of it better aligns the dependency graph with like the website being redone and being updated in there. So I think it was only fitting that the dependency graph got some love there too. What about you?
Yeah, I think he's asking about post 13, but the dev graph again, it's really good. Also, shout out to Ben again. He was the one that did all this. And maybe I'll throw it to. Sorry, Brandon. What were you going to say?
No, go ahead.
Maybe I'll throw it to Victor, because we're currently in the process of getting the version 14 roadmap out. So I don't know how much we want to expand on that right now.
We can talk about it. We don't have to talk too much, but none of it is secret to understand. We're just trying to publish something that is, in general, I think if you look at our 13 roadmap and you compare it with the release notes and see, okay, how much would we actually accomplished, right? Like, what is the overlap? Because we accomplished some of the things that were not in the roadmap, because, maybe we didn't think they're important enough, or we discovered them later, right? And maybe we didn't accomplish something, but the overlap is actually pretty good. So normally, like usually, we're pretty good at hitting all the items in the roadmap, right? So that's why we're not we're just taking an extra week to figure out what exactly will be in 14, right? In general, though, the 13 to 14 will be we iterate the releases. So we do a high feature release in like 6 months, then a sort of more maintenance release in the next 6 months, where there are still features, but most of it on quality. So we go back and forth to make sure that new cool features are landing, and at the same time the quality remains, high, right? Because it's hard to maintain an open source project, as people know, right? It's a lot of effort, and Nx is growing exponentially, so the number of users reporting issues is also growing, right? So it's effort to make sure it's all healthy and stuff, right? My main there are a few things I'm excited, right? There are a lot of refactoring stuff that was delayed because, again, we never break people, or we try to never break people. It's a lot of effort is put into that, right? It's a big part of what we're trying to do. So some of the refactoring is often delayed because you have to put a lot of machinery around, so people cannot be broken once you refactor things, right? So that is what I have on my roadmap, because I have a bunch of packages that are there that should not be there. Like, the responsibilities are split kind of awkwardly. There is some duplication implementation because just historically ended up being this way, right? So we're going to clean it up by 14, so it's a more elegant, clean repo, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is I am excited about, but I think in general about presentation, how we visual things we show. I think Nx has a lot of good-looking things, right? Our Next.dev is already good-looking, but going to be even more descriptive and better-looking, and I like it. I think it should look appealing, so people who check out Nx feel good about it. So I'm very excited about that. Dev graph is another example of that type of thing, where yes, some Basic also renders dev graphs, right? But they are, not not looking very good. So, and it's important to look well, right? So when people run, they feel good, that it looks professional, it's appealing visually, right? And it also provides value, right? So I'm always excited about all of those type of things, right? And Next Console is another example. The VS Code plugin, so you see it in VS Code again. So it's a piece of UI that can be very helpful. And it's if it looks good, it's good, right? So we're going to do a round of beautification, clean up our terminal output, right? Essentially, what we print out right now is not bad or anything, right? But there are many things we can like put a bit of polish around to make sure the terminal output is a bit more concise, a bit more descriptive, just make it better all around, right? I can see lots of things that we can improve in there, right? So that's one of the things, again, I'm excited about. Even though it won't change the fundamentals of how you run things, every time you run something, it will look a bit better and you'll get a tiny bit of happiness, right? And that does matter, right? But there are like very many things, right, that we have in our roadmap regarding performance, and lots of other things that you will see next week once I publish a roadmap. But today it's mostly about good looking stuff, good looking website, good looking terminal, good looking like dev graph, right? Everything has to look very good, right, for people to enjoy using the tool.
Yeah, we gotta have solid functionality and shiny demos is what.
Yeah, it's you think it's silly, but we added some features that are kind of useful, but they're more useful for smaller apps. Because demos is not just you show it to a person over there. It's also when you're playing around with it yourself, right? It's still a demo. It's just it's the same demo like experience. You just do it for yourself, right? So that thing is it's important to optimize that. It's not a silly use case. It actually matters because then when you're playing around with something, it's easy, it's visual, you can get what's going on. One thing I want to mention that I relate to looks. Okay, this is good looking stuff. One over here. The second thing is that Nx in general is pretty good at anyone who says Nx is opinionated to batteries and clothes or whatever. They're basically incorrect. Okay, that's just the truth of it. The plugins for Nx are somewhat opinionated. But Nx Core, it doesn't care what you do, right? It's a very general purpose task orchestrator, right? So that can run across multiple machines on one machine, do a lot of interesting things. You can drop it to any project, as Brandon showed you that command, and whatever mono repo you have, it should just work. It's an asterisk. Maybe something in your particular repo won't work for some bizarre reason, but really for most repos it should just work, right? So that's an important property that the core of it is actually very simple and not opinionated. We put some effort already in Next 13 optimizing it. You don't see it much. Now we don't talk about it yet because it's already simpler. The configuration is cleaner, but it's still sort of in the works. But what I want to make Nx a good tool for is just any JavaScript/TypeScript project. That should be your just default choice, right? If you start a TypeScript project and you think, oh, how can I compile my TypeScript project or test it or lint it or whatever, right? Yeah, you should be just using Next. It should be close to zero overhead. It should just give you some ways to configure test. If you want to, you can do it yourself, but we can give it for you. LinkedIn, you can do it yourself, but we can give it to you. We can compile it. You can compile it yourself, but we can, give you enough affordance to do it. So give you an ability to quickly scaffold simple TS/JS projects that have nothing to do with React or Angular or Node or any of that stuff, right? Because really, a lot of the Next fundamentals work categorically the same way, right? Regardless whether you use a framework or not, right? That's what I want to make the fantastic. It's already a good use case, but just a bit of clumsiness here and there. The configuration is slightly too long where it should be. It requires you to remove some file. The file shouldn't even be, just a few small annoyances around that, may sort of make it not the best first impression, right? So this polish over there, that matters, right? And that's what I want it to be. Basically, it should be the de facto TypeScript tool. Right? If you want to compile TypeScript test-oriented, why would you use anything but Nx? Nx works. VS Code integration is great. Everything is in there. There is no downside, really, right? So that's sort of the goal, right? And by 14, it will be. It will materialize very soon, right? But by 14, hopefully, it will be something that it will be easier to make this type of argument, right? When you argue with some random person at the meetup.
Did you have anything to add, Jack?
No, I think there's a lot of things we're looking at. A few things that we were originally thinking about for 13. Now we're maybe pushing it to 14 or one of the minor releases for 13. So one is we're looking at SWC as a option. The only downside there is you lose type checking and stuff, whatever. But it's much faster. A few of us actually experimented with it for both React and Node. So that's probably something that we'll get to at some point. It just didn't make sense to push it for 13. Like we already have way too many things going in. So
Right. Did people see the blog post? I mean, there was a there was a lot of features in there, so we had to make some decisions on what we could kind of punt on a little bit to make sure it's more stable.
Yeah, and the last thing is we're seriously looking at like the MFE, like the micro frontend support for React. I know few people have been asking, so that's also something that we're looking at.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, the like you said, the roadmap for NX14 will be published soon. We'll probably do that like we've done the other ones. We'll post a discussion topic on it, and then people can kind of chime in there on the GitHub repo. So definitely get involved in that discussion there. But yeah, I think that is a good place to kind of cap off here, talking about the NX13 release. Like I said, thanks to all the people in the chat. If you have made it this far in the video, you might as well go ahead and like the video since we're on YouTube and Twitch and streaming all the places. So like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, definitely do that also, because we do these, twice a month, and you'll get the notifications if you sign up for that also. And then I'll post a link into the chat for the Nx.dev website. Like I said, we're always updating that. And we'll just, like I said, we'll continue to keep working. You can see what we do out in the open on the Nx GitHub repo. And if you want to contribute there, you can do that also. Contribute to whatever your ecosystem of choice is that we support there. Also wanted to throw in the React Native support. We added that as first party support into the main repo. So if you're looking to use React Native in your projects, definitely check that out. Also, we'll have more content around that soon. But yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks, Victor, for coming on. And then we'll see everyone next time. See ya.
Thank you.